Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and attention coach, Jeff Copper. And today I'm here to talk about deadlines. If you watch my YouTube channel and you watch my videos, then you'll know I like to pay attention to attention, and I have a tendency to want to kind of get under the hood a little bit. Sometimes it's just basic observations, other times it's science, other times it's just tips and other types of things. And I wanted to share kind of my thinking process and some things that I found fascinating coaching those with ADHD, particularly around their processes, procrastination, and deadlines. It is very, very common for those with ADHD to say they're deadline junkies. They can't get anything done without a deadline. And the immediate rush to judgment, or the appearance is that adrenaline rush, if you will, for the oncoming deadline, or the negative nature of it, is what actually motivates them to get it done. And I've interviewed lots of researchers and asked them if that's a self-medicating behavior. In other words, does that increase the level of dopamine by getting to a deadline to act kind of like a stimulant in medications? And I haven't gotten a yes on that. I have definitely gotten there's an adrenaline rush and it does help focus, but not a emphatic yes, it's kind of a self-medicating behavior. But that's not really why I'm doing this video. What I do when I'm working with people is I'm trying to understand their cognitive process. How do they think? How do they put things together? How do they organize information in their mind? And often I am very curious about how they study. Like in college, where were you? What was going on? And I began to listen to the environmental factors. Many are sequestered in the back of a library. Some of them are in public places. Some of them have to be moving. Some of them have to be talking. It really, really kind of varies. But what's been fascinating to me as I've studied this and tried to help people understand their natural way of putting information together, I've had a few instances that were curious because I began to look at deadlines and look at a person's process of putting things together, organizing stuff to execute at the deadline. And I have found it to be very fascinating because often I find a lot of clues as to how they naturally process. So let's talk about this. I've actually coached an individual who was very verbal, did a lot of talking out loud. In fact, it was a profound difference when he was with people in meetings and stuff. He solved a lot of problems, but when he was by himself, he really didn't, which explained why when he would bring work home with him, he wouldn't really get much done because there wasn't anybody for him to talk out loud with. By the way, I've done a lot of other videos about working memory and verbal working memory, and how this is not uncommon for those with ADHD. Well, it's interesting to me because one day, one individual was talking about how they had a deadline and how they brought everybody into a room and described to me how they broke things down and parted it out. And I said, you know, it's interesting to me because we know that you talk out loud, we know meetings really work for you, and that's really what happens. And isn't it curious that's exactly what you did on the impending deadline? And the guy was kind of brought back by this for a second, and as we processed it a little bit, he did acknowledge that yes, there was a correlation here between how he did things, but he never thought he was supposed to do it. And I said, well, if you look at it this way, it's like the deadline finally justifies you bringing everybody in a room to do what comes natural. Let's stop for a second. In other words, if you've got a quirky way of doing things, or if you don't do it complete, or you don't do it the way you think you're supposed to do it, the deadline kind of justifies you taking the path of most resistance. Another story is I was working with a computer programmer who was talking about deadlines, and his process was really to skim stuff to find where the nuggets were and then go in and then use it by working with his hands. And another story I had is literally on a plane to go somewhere where he had to go in and do some programming the next day on something that was an emergency. And in fact, we began to map out what we had learned to be his learning modalities and what he was doing at deadline. And it was eerie how much they map together. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's very powerful if you begin to understand your more dominant ways of organizing and processing information, because to me that's what comes naturally. And if you only understood that process in a more methodical way, you could actually begin to create the environment for you to do it in advance, as opposed to going from deadline to deadline, which for many of those with ADHD is exhausting, because if you live your life deadline to deadline, you're always in a state of chaos, and it's very, very exhausting. So let's pull this together and get to my point. My point really is that as a coach, I have found a lot of clues to the way you put things together to be found as you successfully achieve a deadline. And if you stop and pay attention to what you're doing and focus, and there's a little bit of self-awareness of what's actually transpiring, it can give you the clues to what works for you. If you can acknowledge that, even though they're a little bit quirky, and build that environment before the deadline, you might be surprised. You might be able to reduce the energy required for you to live deadline to deadline. So I hope this is giving you something to think about, something to pause and kind of ponder. Every week we release insights and tips and other things regarding ADHD. To get them, just please subscribe to our channel by hitting the subscribe button. And also we encourage you to leave some comments. I always like your feedback, what's working, what's not, and oddly enough, or not oddly enough, it's also helpful because many of your comments actually spur the ideas for new videos. To learn more about me, go to digcoaching.com. We hope you've enjoyed the video. Take care.